The space station looked like a giant metal flower floating in the darkness between stars. Jake Morrison pressed his face against the small window of the transport ship and watched as they got closer to Nexus 7. His heavy armor made it hard to move, but he had worn it for so many years that it felt like a second skin. The metal plates covered every part of his body, and the helmet made his voice sound different when he spoke. Captain Lisa Hayes walked up behind him. She was the leader of their group, and Jake respected her more than anyone else he had ever served with. Her face looked worried as she stared out at the space station. "This is it, Morrison," she said quietly. "First time humans will meet the Zephyrians face to face. Everything we do today will change history." Jake nodded inside his helmet. He had read all the files about the Zephyrians during the long trip here. They were tall and thin, with skin that looked like it was made of crystal. The reports said they could read minds and talk to each other without using words. Their ships were beautiful but deadly, and they had been fighting a war with humans for 3 years. The war had started by accident. A human mining ship had gone into Zephyrian space without knowing it. The Zephyrians thought it was an attack and destroyed the ship. Humans thought the Zephyrians were the ones who attacked first. Many people died on both sides before anyone realized it was all a big mistake. Now both sides wanted peace, but nobody trusted each other. That was why Jake and 5 other soldiers were here. Their job was to keep the human diplomats safe while they tried to make a peace deal. The transport ship docked with Nexus 7 with a soft bump. Jake checked his weapon one more time and followed Captain Hayes through the airlock. The inside of the space station was nothing like human ships. The walls curved in smooth lines, and soft blue light came from everywhere at once. The air smelled like flowers, which seemed strange for a place in space. Ambassador Cale Thross was waiting for them in the main meeting room. Jake had never seen a Zephyrian before, and he was surprised by how different they looked from humans. Thross was at least 7 feet tall, with long arms and fingers that moved like water. His skin really did look like crystal, changing colors as the light hit it. His eyes were large and completely white, with no pupils that Jake could see. Thross stood a female Zephyrian who was smaller than him, but still taller than any human. Her skin was more blue than white, and she wore long robes that seemed to float around her body. Jake noticed that she was looking directly at him, even though he was standing behind the other humans. Her white eyes made him feel uncomfortable, like she could see right through his armor. Captain Hayes stepped forward and spoke in the formal way that diplomats used. "Ambassador Thross, I am Captain Lisa Hayes of the Human Defense Force. We are honored to meet you and grateful for this chance to talk about peace." Ambassador Thross did not speak with his mouth. Instead, the female Zephyrian next to him opened her mouth and words came out. But Jake could tell that the words were coming from Thross somehow. It was very strange to watch. "I am Ambassador Cale Thross of the Zephyrian Empire. This is Lyra Velinari, who will speak my words for me. We welcome you to Nexus 7, though we are concerned about the weapons and armor your soldiers carry." Jake felt his muscles tense up inside his armor. They had talked about this problem during the trip here. The Zephyrians did not like that humans always wore armor and carried weapons. But humans did not trust anyone enough to meet them without protection. Captain Hayes tried to explain. "Our soldiers are here only to keep us safe. They will not start any fights unless we are attacked first. This is normal for human diplomacy." "Lyra." Velinari tilted her head, and her crystal skin changed to a darker blue color. When she spoke again, Jake could tell that these were her own words, not the ambassador's. "We understand that humans feel the need to protect themselves, but your armor blocks our ability to sense your true feelings. It is like trying to have a conversation with someone whose face is covered by a mask. How can we trust people whose thoughts we cannot read?" The meeting went badly after that. Every time the humans tried to explain something, the Zephyrians seemed to get more upset. Jake watched as Ambassador Thross's skin changed from white to red, which probably meant he was angry. Other Zephyrians in the room started moving there, hands in quick gestures that looked like they might be their way of talking to each other. The worst moment came when Captain Hayes put her hand on her weapon out of habit. She did not even think about it, but all the Zephyrians in the room suddenly stepped backward. Ambassador Thross said something in his own language that sounded very angry. Lyra spoke for him again, but this time her voice was cold. The ambassador wants to know if humans came here to make peace or to threaten us with violence. That was not a threat, Captain Hayes said quickly. My officer was just being careful. We do not want to fight, but Jake could see that the damage was done. The Zephyrians did not believe them. Lyra was still looking at him, and now her skin was almost black with what he guessed was fear or anger. The meeting ended without any progress, and both sides agreed to try again the next day. As the humans walked back to their ship, Captain Hayes shook her head. This is going to be harder than we thought. They can't read us through our armor, so they think we're hiding something dangerous. Jake looked back at the meeting room through his helmet's camera. Lyra was still standing there, watching them leave. For just a moment, their eyes met through the small window. Even though her skin was still dark with worry, something in her white eyes looked curious instead of afraid. Maybe there was hope after all. Jake could not sleep that night. He kept thinking about the meeting and how badly it had gone. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lyra Velinari's white eyes staring at him through his helmet. The way she looked at him was different from how the other Zephyrians looked at the humans. They seemed afraid or angry, but she seemed like she was trying to figure something out. Captain Hayes called a meeting early the next morning. All the humans gathered in the small conference room on their ship. Jake sat in his armor like always, but it felt heavier today. The captain looked tired, like she had not slept much either. Yesterday was a disaster, she said, without trying to make it sound better than it was. The Zephyrians think we're hiding something dangerous because they can't read our minds through our armor. They're right about one thing. How can we build trust with people who can't tell what we're really thinking? One of the other diplomats raised his hand. But Captain, our armor is the only thing keeping us safe. What if this is all a trick to make us defenseless? Jake understood why the man was worried. Humans had learned to never trust anyone completely. It was one of the reasons they had survived so long in a dangerous galaxy. But he also remembered the look in Lyra's eyes. She had not looked like someone planning to hurt them. Captain Hayes was quiet for a long time. Finally, she took a deep breath and made a decision that surprised everyone. We're going to try something that goes against everything we've been taught, she said. For today's meeting, I want all security personnel to remove their armor. The room became completely silent. Jake felt his heart start beating faster. Take off his armor? He had not been without it during a mission in over 5 years. It would be like walking into a room full of strangers while naked. Captain, Jake said carefully, are you sure that's a good idea? If something goes wrong, ... If something goes wrong, we'll deal with it, Hayes said firmly. But right now, our armor is the biggest problem we have. The Zephyrians see us as threats because they can't read our intentions. Maybe if we show them that we're willing to be vulnerable, they'll start to trust us. Jake wanted to argue, but he could see that the captain had already made up her mind. He also had to admit that she might be right. Yesterday had proven that their current approach was not working. 2 hours later, Jake stood in front of the mirror in his small room and looked at himself without armor for the first time in weeks. He felt strange and light, like he might float away if he was not careful. His regular clothes felt thin and useless compared to the thick metal plates he was used to wearing. But Captain Hayes was right about one thing. If the Zephyrians could read human emotions, they would be able to tell that the humans really did want peace. The walk to the meeting room felt longer than usual. Jake kept wanting to look over his shoulder or check for threats, but without his armor sensors, he could only use his own eyes and ears. It reminded him of being a young soldier again, before he had learned to depend on technology for everything. Lyra Velinari was the first Zephyrian to notice when the humans entered the room. Jake saw her white eyes go wide with surprise, and her crystal skin shifted from blue to a bright silver color. She said something quickly in her own language to Ambassador Thross, who turned to look at the humans with what Jake thought might be shock. For a moment, nobody spoke. Jake felt exposed and uncomfortable, but he forced himself to stand straight and keep his hands relaxed at his sides. He noticed that Lyra was looking at him again, but this time it felt different. She was not trying to see through armor or guess what he was thinking. She was just looking at him like he was a person instead of a machine. Ambassador Thross spoke through Lyra, and his words sounded confused. "Why have your soldiers removed their protection? Do you not fear us?" Captain Hayes stepped forward. Her voice was steady, but Jake could tell she was nervous too. "We removed our armor because we want you to see that we have nothing to hide. We came here to make peace, not to fight. Our soldiers are still here to protect us, but we want you to be able to read our intentions." Lyra translated the ambassador's response, but Jake noticed that she kept looking at him while she spoke. "The ambassador says that this is unexpected. He can now sense your emotions, and he feels that you are telling the truth about wanting peace. But he is curious about why your soldiers were willing to make themselves vulnerable." Jake found himself speaking before he had time to think about it. "Because sometimes you have to take risks to build trust. We could have stayed in our armor and been safer, but that would not have helped anyone. If we want you to trust us, we have to show that we trust you first." This time, Lyra did not wait for the ambassador to speak. She answered Jake directly, and her skin turned a warm golden color. "In our culture, only the bravest warriors ever remove their protection in the presence of potential enemies. But humans do this for the sake of peace talks. This is very interesting to us." The rest of the meeting went much better than the day before. The Zephyrians could now sense that the humans were telling the truth about their peaceful intentions. Ambassador Thross's skin stayed a calm white color, and he even made what Jake thought might be a smile when Captain Hayes explained how human democracy worked. But Jake found himself paying more attention to Lyra than to the formal negotiations. She kept watching him with those strange white eyes, and he started to realize that she was studying more than just his emotions. She was looking at how he moved, how he stood, how he reacted to different things. It was like she had never seen a human without armor before, which was probably true. During a break in the talks, Lyra approached Jake while the other diplomats were talking among themselves. Her skin was a soft blue color now, which he had learned meant she was calm and curious. "May I ask you a question?" she said in her musical voice. Jake nodded. "Sure. How do you feel without your armor? Are you not afraid?" Jake thought about how to answer honestly. "I am afraid," he admitted. "But being afraid doesn't mean I can't do my job. Sometimes being brave means doing something, even when you're scared." Lyra's skin shifted to that golden color again. "This is what I find most interesting about humans. You choose to be vulnerable when you believe it will help others. In our society, we are taught that showing weakness is always dangerous. Maybe that's the difference between our peoples," Jake said. "We've learned that sometimes showing weakness can actually make you stronger, especially when you're trying to build friendships." As the day's meeting ended, Jake felt hopeful for the first time since they had arrived at Nexus 7. The Zephyrians were starting to understand that humans were not as threatening as they had thought. And Jake was beginning to understand that. Maybe taking off his armor had been about more than just diplomacy. It had been about showing both species that real strength sometimes came from the willingness to be vulnerable. The next few days brought something Jake had not expected. Instead of just standing guard during the meetings, he found himself working directly with Lyra Velinari on something called Cultural Exchange Protocols. The idea was that if humans and Zephyrians were going to be allies, they needed to understand how each other's societies worked. Captain Hayes had assigned Jake to work with Lyra because she said he was good at explaining military thinking to civilians. But Jake suspected there was another reason. Lyra had specifically asked for him to be her partner in this project. She said she wanted to understand how human soldiers thought when they were not wearing armor. They met every morning in a small room that had windows looking out at the stars. Jake still felt strange without his armor, but he was getting used to it. Lyra seemed more relaxed, too. Her skin stayed mostly silver or gold when they talked, which he had learned meant she was comfortable and interested. "Tell me about human combat training," Lyra said on their third day, working together. She was sitting across from him at a simple table, her long fingers folded in front of her. Not the technical parts, but how it changes the way you think. Jake had never been asked a question like that before. Most people wanted to know about weapons or tactics, not about how training affected his mind. He thought carefully before answering. "I guess the biggest thing is that we learn to adapt," he said. "Human soldiers are taught that plans will always go wrong, so we have to be ready to change what we're doing at any moment. We can't depend on having the right equipment or being in the right place. We have to work with whatever we have." Lyra's skin shifted to a deeper gold color. "This is very different from how Zephyrian warriors are trained. We rely on our psychic abilities to know what our enemies will do before they do it. But you cannot read minds, so you must be ready for anything." "That's right," Jake said. "And I think that's why taking off my armor was so important. When you can't predict what will happen, you learn that being flexible is more important than being protected." Over the following days, Jake learned more about Zephyrian society than he had ever expected to. Lyra explained that her people had been using psychic abilities for so long that they had almost forgotten how to deal with uncertainty. They could sense each other's emotions and intentions, which meant they rarely faced surprises or had to guess what someone else was thinking. "It must be very lonely," Lyra said one afternoon, "to live inside your own mind without being able to share your thoughts directly with others." Jake considered this. "I've never thought of it as lonely. We share our thoughts by talking and by our actions. Maybe it takes longer than your way, but it can be just as meaningful." "Show me," Lyra said, leaning forward with curiosity. Jake was not sure what she meant. "Show you what?" "Show me how humans communicate without words. I can sense your emotions, but I want to understand how you would share them with another human who could not read your mind." This was harder than Jake had expected. He had never tried to explain human body language to someone who did not understand it naturally. He started with simple things, like how humans smiled when they were happy or frowned when they were confused. Lyra watched everything he did with intense focus, her wide eyes tracking every movement of his face and hands. "Your species is much more expressive than I realized," she said after he had demonstrated several basic expressions. "Even without psychic abilities, you are constantly sharing information about your inner state." "We have to," Jake said. "If we couldn't tell what other people were feeling, we would never be able to work together or build relationships." On their 5th day of working together, something happened that changed everything. Jake and Lyra were in their usual meeting room when alarms started going off throughout the space station. The lights changed from blue to red, and a voice in both human and Zephyrian languages announced that there was an atmospheric breach in one of the outer sections. Jake's training kicked in immediately. He stood up and started moving toward the door, his mind already working on evacuation procedures and safety protocols. But then he stopped and looked back at Lyra, who was sitting frozen in her chair, with her skin turning white with fear. "Come on," he said, reaching out his hand to her. "We need to get to the emergency stations." Lyra stared at his hand for a moment. "I do not understand what to do. Zephyrians do not train for emergencies like this. Our psychic abilities usually warn. You ask before problems happen." Jake realized that this was exactly what she had been talking about. The Zephyrians were so used to knowing what would happen next that they did not know how to handle unexpected situations. Without thinking about it, he took charge. "Just follow me and do what I do," he said calmly. "I'll get us both to safety." He LED Lyra through the corridors of the space station, stopping at each emergency station to help other people who looked confused or scared. Some were human and some were Zephyrian, but Jake treated them all the same way. He spoke calmly, gave clear instructions, and made sure everyone knew where to go. Lyra watched all of this with growing amazement. She could sense that Jake was worried about the emergency, but he never let that worry stop him from helping others. He moved through the chaos with a confidence that did not come from his armor or his weapons. It came from his training and his natural instinct to protect people. The atmospheric breach turned out to be minor, and it was fixed within an hour. But something important had happened during that hour. Lyra had seen how humans behaved when they could not predict what would happen next. Instead of becoming paralyzed by uncertainty, they became more focused and more determined to help each other. When they returned to their meeting room, Lyra's skin was a color Jake had never seen before. It was bright silver with gold streaks running through it, and it seemed to glow with its own light. "What does that color mean?" Jake asked. Lyra was quiet for a moment. "It means I am beginning to understand something new. All this time, I thought humans were weak because you cannot read minds or predict the future. But now I see that this apparent weakness is actually a kind of strength. You have learned to be strong in ways that my people never needed to develop." "What do you mean?" "When you took off your armor, I thought you were just showing trust. But today I realized it was more than that. You were showing that human strength does not come from your technology or your ability to predict what will happen. It comes from your willingness to face uncertainty and still choose to help others." Jake felt something warm in his chest at her words. "I never thought about it that way. My people have become too dependent on our psychic abilities." Lyra continued, "We have forgotten how to be brave when we do not know what will happen next. But humans do this every day. You live with uncertainty and still choose to trust each other." That night, Jake lay in his bed thinking about what Lyra had said. He had always thought of human limitations as things to overcome or work around. But maybe she was right. Maybe the fact that humans had to work harder too, understand each other, and predict the future had made them stronger in other ways. For the first time since he had taken off his armor, Jake felt truly proud of what it meant to be human. Jake woke up to the sound of explosions echoing through the metal walls of Nexus 7. Emergency lights were flashing red and yellow, and the space station was shaking like something was hitting it from outside. He rolled out of bed and grabbed his clothes, his military training taking over even before he was fully awake. Without his armor, getting dressed took only seconds instead of the usual 10 minutes. He ran out of his room and almost crashed into Captain Hayes in the corridor. She looked worried but determined, the way she always did during a crisis. "What's happening?" Jake asked as they moved quickly toward the command center. "Zephyrian rebels," Hayes said, checking her weapon. "A group that doesn't want peace with humans. They're attacking the station with some kind of new technology that's messing with our equipment. Most of our systems are down." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Without their advanced technology, humans would be at a serious disadvantage. Their weapons might not work, their communication systems could be jammed, and their sensors would be useless. It was exactly the kind of situation that their enemies had always hoped for. When they reached the command center, they found chaos. Human technicians were trying to restart computers that kept shutting down. Zephyrian staff members were standing around looking confused and frightened. Their skin colors were all wrong, flashing between white, red, and black in patterns that Jake had learned meant extreme fear and anger. Ambassador Thross was in the center of the room, speaking rapidly in his own language to Lyra and several other Zephyrians. When he saw the humans arrive, his skin turned a deep red color. Lyra translated his words, and her voice was shaking. The ambassador says that a rebel group called the Crystal Blade has taken control of 3 sections of the station. They have weapons specifically designed to stop human technology from working. They believe that without your machines, you will be helpless. Jake looked around the room and realized that the rebels might be right. The human staff members were pressing buttons and flipping switches, but nothing was responding. They're advanced. Computers and weapon systems were completely dead, but then Jake remembered what Lyra had said about human adaptability. Maybe this was exactly the kind of situation where humans could prove that their strength did not come from their technology. "Captain," Jake said quietly, "I think I can get to the station's backup defense systems. But I'll have to do it without any electronic help." Hayes looked at him like he was crazy. "Morrison, that's 3 sections away through corridors controlled by hostile forces. Without your armor or working sensors, it would be suicide." "Maybe," Jake said, "but it's also exactly the kind of mission humans are trained for. We know how to navigate and fight without technology. The rebels think that makes us weak, but they're wrong." Before Captain Hayes could stop him, Jake was moving toward the exit. He heard Lyra call his name, and when he turned around, he saw that her skin had turned bright gold. "I am coming with you," she said firmly. "No way," Jake said. "It's too dangerous, and you don't have any combat training." "But I have psychic abilities," Lyra replied. "I can sense where the rebels are and help you avoid them. And I can communicate with the station's computer systems in ways that your technology cannot." Jake wanted to argue, but he could see that she had already made up her mind. He also had to admit that her abilities could be very useful. The rebels had prepared for human technology, but they probably had not thought about humans and Zephyrians working together. "All right," he said, "but you do exactly what I tell you when I tell you. No arguments." Lyra nodded, her skin shifting to a determined silver color. They left the command center through a maintenance tunnel that Jake hoped the rebels had not discovered yet. Without his armor's maps and sensors, he had to rely on the station blueprints he had memorized during his first day here. It felt strange to be navigating by memory and instinct instead of by computer guidance. Lyra stayed close behind him, her skin changing colors as she used her psychic abilities to scan for threats. She would touch his shoulder and point in different directions, warning him when rebels were nearby. Her abilities worked even better than his armor sensors had, because she could sense emotions and intentions instead of just physical presence. The first group of rebels they encountered was guarding a corridor junction. Jake could see 3 of them through a partially open door. They had weapons that looked similar to Zephyrian energy rifles, but with strange modifications that were probably meant to disrupt human technology. Jake motioned for Lyra to stay back, then used techniques he had learned in basic training years ago. He moved silently along the wall, using shadows and blind spots to get close to the rebels without being seen. When he was close enough, he used hand-to-hand combat skills to disable them quickly and quietly. Lyra watched all of this with amazement. Her skin was bright silver with gold streaks, and she kept staring at Jake like she had never seen anything like what he had just done. "How did you do that?" she whispered as they continued through the corridors. "Training and practice," Jake said simply. "Human soldiers learn to fight without depending on technology. We have to be ready for situations exactly like this." They encountered 2 more groups of rebels on their way to the defense systems. Each time, Jake used different tactics based on what he could observe about their positions and weapons. Lyra helped by telling him what the rebels were feeling and thinking, which gave him advantages he could never have had with just his armor sensors. The most dangerous moment came when they had to cross a large open area where the rebels had set up a checkpoint. There was no way to sneak past them, and fighting would attract too much attention from other rebel groups. "Can you sense how many there are?" Jake asked. Lyra concentrated, her skin shifting through several colors. 7 of them, but they are not paying close attention. They believe that humans cannot move through the station without their technology working. "Then let's prove them wrong," Jake said. He found a way to create a distraction by triggering a minor alarm in a different section of the station. While the rebels were investigating the noise, Jake and Lyra moved quickly across the open area and reached the defense system controls. The backup systems were old and simple compared to the station's main computers. They had been designed to work even if everything else failed, which meant they were not affected by the rebels' technology disrupting weapons. But they also required manual operation, which meant someone had to know how to run them without computer assistance. Fortunately, Jake had studied these systems during his security briefings. While Lyra used her psychic abilities to interface with the station's basic computer network, Jake activated the emergency protocols that would isolate the rebel-controlled sections and restore power to the rest of the station. Working together, they were able to do something that neither humans nor Zephyrians could have accomplished alone. Jake's knowledge of human technology, combined with Lyra's psychic abilities, created a partnership that the rebels had never expected. When the station's main systems came back online, the rebellion collapsed quickly. The rebels had counted on human technology being disabled, but they had not prepared for humans who could fight effectively without it. The combination of Jake's adaptability and Lyra's psychic support had turned their greatest advantage into a weakness. As they made their way back to the command center, Lyra's skin was glowing with colors Jake had never seen before. She kept looking at him with those white eyes, but now he could see something in them that looked like respect and wonder. "The rebels were wrong about humans," she said quietly. "They thought your strength came from your technology. But today, I learned that your real strength comes from your ability to adapt and overcome challenges that would stop other species." Jake felt proud, but also grateful. "I couldn't have done it without you. Your abilities made it possible for us to work as a team in ways I never imagined." When they reached the command center, they found that both the human and Zephyrian delegations were waiting for them. Captain Hayes looked relieved, and Ambassador Thross's skin was a warm gold color that Jake now knew meant approval and gratitude. The failed rebellion had proven something important to both species. Humans and Zephyrians were stronger when they worked together than either could be alone. And Jake realized that taking off his armor had been about more than just building trust. It had been about showing that true strength came from adaptability, courage, and the willingness to rely on others when necessary. The morning after the rebel attack brought the most important meeting that Jake had ever been part of. Representatives from both human and Zephyrian governments had arrived at Nexus 7 during the night, and everyone knew that the decisions made today would shape the future of both species. Jake stood in the main conference room, wearing his regular clothes instead of armor. After everything that had happened, putting on the heavy metal plates would have felt like stepping backward. He was still a soldier, but he had learned that being a soldier meant more than just carrying weapons and wearing protection. Captain Hayes looked different too. She stood straighter and spoke with more confidence than Jake had ever seen before. The events of the past week had shown her that human diplomacy could be about more than just being careful and defensive. But it was Lyra who surprised everyone the most. Instead of standing quietly behind Ambassador Thross, like she had during the first meetings, she stepped forward to address both delegations directly. Her skin was glowing with bright gold and silver colors, and her white eyes seemed to look at every person in the room. I have been chosen to speak for my people about what we have learned during these talks, she began, her musical voice carrying clearly through the large room. When we first met the humans, we were afraid because we could not read their thoughts through their armor. We believed they were hiding dangerous intentions from us. Several Zephyrian officials nodded, their skin colors showing that they remembered those early fears. But then something unexpected happened, Lyra continued. The humans chose to remove their armor, even though it made them vulnerable. This was not just about showing trust. It was about showing us something we had never seen before, the courage to be strong and vulnerable at the same time. Jake felt his face getting warm as Lyra looked directly at him. He had not expected to become the center of attention in such an important meeting. I spent several days working with Sergeant Jake Morrison to understand human military thinking. Lyra said, "What I learned changed everything I thought I knew about your species. Humans are not weak because they cannot read minds or predict the future. They are strong because they have learned to face uncertainty with courage and adaptability." Ambassador Thross spoke through another translator, since Lyra was giving her own speech. "The ambassador wants to know what specific examples you can give of this human strength." Lyra's skin shifted to an even brighter gold color. "During the rebel attack, I watched Sergeant Morrison navigate through dangerous areas without any technological assistance. He could not use computers or sensors, but he succeeded because he had trained his mind to work without them. He showed me that human strength comes from preparation, adaptability, and the willingness to take risks to protect others." One of the human officials raised his hand. "But what does this mean for our diplomatic relationship? How does understanding our different strengths help us work together?" This time, Jake found himself speaking before anyone else could answer. "I think it means we can learn from each other in ways we never expected. Humans are good at dealing with uncertainty and adapting to new situations. Zephyrians are good at understanding emotions and communicating without words. Together, we might be able to solve problems that neither species could handle alone." Ambassador Thross spoke again, and this time his words were translated by his regular interpreter. "The ambassador agrees with this assessment. The rebel attack showed us that cooperation between our species is not only possible, but more effective than either of us working alone." Captain Hayes stepped forward with a formal document in her hands. "The human government has authorized me to propose a full alliance between our species. We want to establish exchange programs, joint scientific research, and mutual defense agreements." The Zephyrian officials began talking among themselves in their own language, their skin colors shifting through various shades as they communicated psychically. Jake watched the process with fascination, realizing that he was seeing an entire conversation happening without words. After several minutes, Ambassador Thross spoke through his translator. "The Zephyrian Empire accepts this proposal. We also wish to add a special provision for cultural exchange programs, specifically focusing on learning from each other's different approaches to problem solving." As the formal agreements were being signed, Lyra approached Jake privately. Her skin was glowing with colors he had never seen before, deep blues and purples mixed with bright gold. "What do those colors mean?" Jake asked. "They mean I am feeling something that Zephyrians rarely experience," Lyra said quietly. "Excitement about an uncertain future. Before I met you, the idea of not knowing what would happen next was terrifying. But you showed me that uncertainty can also mean possibility and adventure. Jake smiled. Does this mean you're looking forward to visiting Earth? Yes, Lyra said, her skin shifting to pure bright gold. I have volunteered to be part of the first group of Zephyrians to live on your homeworld for an extended period. I want to see how humans behave when they are in their natural environment without any armor at all. Earth is very different from a space station, Jake warned her. It's unpredictable and sometimes dangerous. There are weather patterns that change without warning, animals that might be threats, and millions of humans who all think and act differently from each other. That sounds perfect, Lyra said, and Jake could tell she really meant it. I want to learn how humans deal with all of that uncertainty. And I want to help teach other Zephyrians that unpredictability is not always something to fear. The formal ceremony concluded with both species agreeing to what they called the Nexus Accords. It was the first treaty between humans and Zephyrians. But everyone knew it would not be the last. The two species had too much to learn from each other to stop with just one agreement. As the delegations prepared to return to their respective worlds, Jake realized that his life was about to change in ways he had never expected. He had been assigned to be part of the human delegation that would work with Zephyrian visitors on Earth. His job would be to help them understand human culture and to learn from their unique abilities. Captain Hayes pulled him aside as they prepared to leave Nexus 7. Morrison, I want you to know that what you did here will be remembered for a long time. Taking off your armor might seem like a small thing, but it changed the course of history between our species. I was just following orders, Captain, Jake said. No, Hayes replied. You were doing something much more important than that. You were showing that real strength sometimes requires vulnerability. That's not something you can teach in military school. It's something you have to learn through experience. As their ship pulled away from Nexus 7, Jake looked back at the space station through his window. Lyra was probably on one of the Zephyrian ships nearby, preparing for her own journey to Earth. In a few months, she would walk on soil instead of metal floors, feel wind and rain instead of recycled air, and see a sky that changed colors throughout. A day. Jake found himself looking forward to showing her all of these things. But even more than that, he was excited to see what new things they could discover when they worked together on his homeworld. The trip back to Earth would take several weeks, but for the first time in his military career, Jake was not impatient to reach his destination. He was content to spend the time thinking about what he had learned and planning for a future that was more uncertain and more promising than anything he could have imagined. When he had first put on his armor all those years ago, when Lyra had said she could not look away when he removed his armor, Jake had thought she was just being polite. But now he understood what she had really meant. She had not been looking at his physical appearance. She had been seeing something much more important, a human being who was willing to be vulnerable for the sake of peace, and strong enough to face an uncertain future with hope instead of fear. That, Jake realized, was what it truly meant to be human.